I have a cold. I have a cold. For like 5 straight days now, I've had a cold. I'm super sorry, because that means you get to hear my weird mouth and sinus noises. But here we are, trying real hard anyway. You know what? I'm gonna let you in on a secret about how things work around here. I did not write that in advance. I was able to just compose that like right now. I just sat down, I turned on the mic, I thought about what was going on in my life, and then just boom, that masterpiece. No, seriously, I'm sorry though that I have a cold. One of the disappointing features of this whole thing is that you just get whatever version of me you get on a given day, because we do this every day, and sometimes I feel great and sometimes I don't. It's been a bad run. But hey, I got a question for you. If I were to say to you, let's get together tomorrow morning, what time, if we didn't clarify any further, what time would you imagine in your brain that to be? Now go ahead, if you got somebody there, just like everybody throw out your guess. Let's do it at the same time so you don't inform each other. 1, 2, 3. What does that mean to you? Okay, go. Some of you are probably like, I don't know, if you're getting together with somebody, that's got to be like mid-morning, 10:30, like a little before all of the fast food restaurants flip to lunch. That would still be morning. Surely others of you are like, well, that means you get up and you get some coffee at the diner or the cafe. It's like 6:30. It's before you go to work or go to school. It's real early. The morning's early. And my guess would be that we could do the same thing with the afternoon. That I could be like, oh yeah, we're going to go out and throw the ball around. Tomorrow, let's just go afternoon. Well, that literally means anytime after 12 p.m., but I could certainly see how someone would interpret that as being like, it's midday when it's real nice out and kind of hot, and you go out and get a workout on like when it's like 2 or something. I could imagine someone else hearing, let's go out and throw the ball around tomorrow afternoon. And they mean what somebody else might mean by evening. And they're thinking like, oh, well, right when you get off of work, it's still afternoon. It's like 4:45, 5:15. That's when he's imagining we're going to go, quote, throw the ball around, which, yeah, that is a phrase I say from time to time. But somebody else might be like, what? That is an outrage. 5:15 is the evening. I don't know what kind of ridiculous clock you have at your house, but we don't call that afternoon where I'm from. The point is, there's some general broad brushstrokes that can be employed when it comes to speaking about the division of the day, even in these very modern times when every single one of us is surrounded by unified timekeeping digital devices that are tracking time in the exact same way from some central hub that decides what the time is somewhere else. But this is a very recent innovation. Back when I was teaching college classes, especially American history, I had this little bit that I would do, like a one-day talk, 50 minutes or whatever with some engagement, where we would talk about the history of time, not in like the way fancy astrophysicists write best-selling books about it, but like the history of the cultural perception of time. What did time mean in the 18th century in America? What did time mean in the 19th century? What did it mean post-Civil War as the Industrial Revolution is ramping up and there's more of a vocational expectation that you show up to the workplace? How did that affect time? And then railroads, how did that affect time? Well, that affected a lot because those trains had to run on time, and politicians even campaigned on the idea that the trains are going to run on time. Why does that matter? Well, you have places to be, and that time is closely kept. And eventually, as we get into the 20th century, we would talk about in this little discussion we do in my classes, time and having a very specific grasp of what time it is becomes, I don't want to say neurosis, that's a little too strong, but it becomes a mark of good character. If you don't know what time it is, down to the minute, you are being maybe even disrespectful of other people around you. Now, the entire developing world and Latin America and rural culture in Italy and Spain and France would all like to have a word with us about how we imagine knowing time down to the second is a gesture of responsibility or respect to other people in your life, or how being right on time is some kind of mark of good character. But in the United States, it became that. And we sent people to school and we raised them on the bell system. And when you hear the bell, You've got exactly 5 minutes to get the next thing. And if you're not in your seat for the next thing, then you get punished. And as a kid, you learn that that was bad because you didn't honor the clock. And the clock became a very powerful thing, but it wasn't always. It became a globally powerful thing, especially in the 20th century after the age of railroads and mass transit and going to a common workplace and etc. Now, look, I know that I went way too far down the rabbit hole on this particular topic right here, but yeah, I don't care because I think it's really interesting. And it was always one of everybody's favorite things to sit and talk about. Like, whoa, there was a time before we thought about time the way we think about time now. Weird how that affects me. Weird how now time is something we would expect everybody to have nailed down so much that we could even in a court case be like, no, what was the exact minute that the thing happened? No, sir, you are lying. You were facing the other way at that second. There's a time before we could have broken things down to such a specific level. Well, one of those times that was before that is the time that we're looking at in the Bible. And when we talk about a crucifixion account, we got to understand that we are dealing with an ancient world rendering system for how time works. And people back then tended to break down the entire 24-hour cycle into 8 3-hour chunks. Now, this is not universal. There's a little bit of variation in certain Greek culture. It looks like the Persians maybe handled this a little bit differently. I don't know how the Egyptians handled time. I just never looked it up. Maybe it's like this. Maybe it's different. The Romans at times looked content to think of times and seasons in a way that matched with whatever conquered people group they were dealing with, but they seem to have a very centralized Latin version of time, which looks a lot like what we're dealing with in Judea during the time of the crucifixion. And so basically speaking, you got these 8 divisions. Now, in the nighttime, we call those watches. And the thinking is that you got 12 hours of dark. Maybe this made a little more sense as you're getting down a touch closer to the equator. But the reality is the seasons shifted time-wise like they do now. And even people as prominent as Julius Caesar had to grapple with the reality that time was slipping and shifting and moving in different ways. Calendars had to be adjusted and tweaked, sometimes very dramatically, because time is not neat and uniform, especially when you're not on the equator. So all of this is speaking in generalizations here. And if you're starting to look at your own watch and you're being like, wait, where is this going? How are we all going to get this done in the amount of time that we have today? Well, then you're playing right into my trap and illustrating my point perfectly, because this is going to be a 2-day conversation, and that's just going to be fine. But back to the point. You got 12 hours of dark, 12 hours of light. I understand that's only going to be 100% accurate like a couple days a year, but whatever. You get the gist. Those 12 hours of darkness, you have watches. Like somebody would stay up and they would be their job for 3 hours to make sure nothing bad happened to the property, to the troops, to the animals, whatever it is. And then the daylight cycle of 12 hours would start with the first division of 3, which would be sunrise. That would be roughly 6 a.m. if we're assuming that we're right on the 12-hour split part of the calendar. And then the third hour would be 3 hours after sunrise. Now, look, there is no universal timepiece that all of these people have. So when you're talking about measuring your daytime hours off of sunrise, we all know that isn't going to be uniform throughout the year. If you live in an extreme northern elevation, that's going to swing dramatically depending on what time of year you're talking about. So we see the built-in problem here. But as a gist, daylight hours are measured starting with the first look at the sun up to about 3 hours after that. And that's your basic sunrise quadrant of the daytime. Then you've got what's called the third hour. That third hour is going to run from, depending on the time of year, 7 in the morning to maybe 8:30, 9:30. I don't know. It could swing pretty dramatically. But then when the 6th hour starts, which is your next quadrant, and it's a 3-hour chunk, That's going to start, again, variably depending on the time of the year based on the time that the sun came up. And then you've got the 9th hour, which is your last chunk of light before you go back into the watch cycle. I suppose the 12th hour is where that flips over, or the first watch. I guess you could probably call it either of those things. And at times it would appear people did call it either of those things. Here's why all of this matters. We've got a Bible controversy, and the Bible controversy happens when we go and we look at this little chunk in Matthew 27 where it says when all of this was happening. And we talked about this moment where everything turned dark during the crucifixion, and Matthew 27:45 says from the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over the land. But Mark, Luke, and John, well, there's some variations between the 4 different accounts. And this is one of those things that we could look at and be like, man, this is a beautiful story. Obviously, we're really lingering on the crucifixion thing because of how crucial it is to everything that's going on here. This is the pivotal story of the whole thing, is this couple of pages that we've been on here for a long time and that we have a ways to go on yet. So this detail matters. And if you can't make sense of this detail, it'd be real easy to start thinking to yourself, well, what else about this account is shady if we can't even get the time of day that things are happening right? Which is why we had the conversation today about the precise nature of how we conceive of time now versus the much less precise nature of time structures and time measurement blocks throughout the day back in the ancient world. I said this was going to be a 2-day conversation, and it is. And guess what? I'm going to record the other part right now, which means no matter how good I feel tomorrow, you're still going to get the cold. And I'm sorry for that. I truly, deeply am. Here's to feeling better, pals. All right, I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon. And in my case, it's going to be very, very, very soon. In your case, tomorrow. Okay, bye.